Okay, let's go ahead and get started this morning. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Tim Begonis. I'm the CMO here at D-Tools, and with me is Travis Leo, CEO of Tracknicity. And what we're going to show today is we're going to talk a little bit about how D-Tools and Tracknicity can really help solve the problems associated with inventory management through an integrated process. And let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what we'll cover today is we'll do a brief overview of D-Tools and Tracknicity. We'll go through some of the problems that this integrated solution is attempting to solve. Travis will go through some of the newer features in Tracknicity, kind of what the workflow is, do a demonstration, and then again, we'll open it up to Q&A at the end. We should probably take about 45 minutes. So we appreciate your time and know everyone's busy, so we appreciate it and we'll get right to it. So a little bit about D-Tools. Obviously, we are a solution that is geared to help system integrators streamline the way that they generate system proposals, estimation, tied to very detailed project documentation such as drawings. We integrate on our SI system integrator side, we integrate with Visio and AutoCAD for very detailed engineered drawings. Our D-Tools cloud offering is really focused more on the sales cycle, where we help integrators very quickly generate proposals through a completely web interface, and we have some browser-based drawings, so plan views and visual quoting. So both solutions are really geared to help streamline the processes around estimation, system design. Both of our integrations with Tracknicity are through QuickBooks on the SI side as well as the D-Tools cloud side. We really have grown over the last 20 years. We started in residential AV and we've grown to serve the commercial, corporate, and security industries. Many of you are familiar with what we do and we appreciate you taking time with us today. And then I'm going to hand it over to Travis Leo, who can tell you a bit about Tracknicity, how we're working together, and how our solutions together can really help solve the inventory management problem.
Great. Tim, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys, everybody, for joining. As Tim said, my name is Travis Leo, and I'm the CEO of Tracknicity. I have Jim Ford, one of the co-founders of Tracknicity, with me here as well. Many of you probably joined for our kind of launch webinar that we did probably 4 or 5 months ago when we first announced our partnership with D-Tools. So we wanted to do a little refresher on that and then show what's new, because we got a lot of great feedback coming out of that session. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Tracknicity, what Tracknicity is an inventory management application for mobile field workers and installation technicians who handle parts and inventory for customers. So as Tim mentioned earlier, we integrate with D-Tools through QuickBooks, both desktop and online, using the QuickBooks API. And really what Tracknicity is designed for is the AV industry, security, electrical, IT, technology, really anybody that has a mobile workforce that is handling high dollar, high value parts, and either parts that were either purchased directly for stock that go into an inventory account, or parts that were purchased specifically for a job, and I'll get into that as we go along here. So a couple of key features. I mentioned the QuickBooks integration. One-click integrate directly with QuickBooks, so you're not managing separate applications, separate data sources. Everything is synced and tied into to QuickBooks. Tracknicity gives you multi-location capability, so you can track as many warehouses, as many vans, as many locations, however you want to track your inventory. And it also segments out between stock parts and parts purchased for specific projects. So you know, by trade, I ran an AV company in Colorado, still do actually. And we were struggling with how to create a solution or come up with a solution for this, because we would buy a lot of parts specifically for a job, but we also had parts that we would keep in stock. And we found that there were applications that did one or the other well, but they were really expensive and really difficult to deploy. And we said, well, that doesn't really work for our business. And so, long story short, over the course of a year, we ended up creating this and the application that went along with it. One of the big new features of Tracknicity is the ability to track serial numbers, MAC addresses, IP addresses. So, when you take a product out to a job site, your technicians can scan the serial number, add in a MAC address, a free form field like a location or something like that, and then pull that information up on the web dashboard. So, makes doing advanced replacements or RMAs incredibly easy and gives you that tracking that's linked directly to the client in QuickBooks. Using the iOS and Android app, you give your employees a mobile barcode scanner. So we'll demonstrate the app here. Unfortunately, we can't demonstrate the mobile barcode scanning because we don't have an actual phone. We're using a simulator. But using the camera functionality of the phone, you can scan serial numbers, you can scan UPC codes. You can also type them in freeform as well, but adding that scanning is a real time-saving feature. Checking parts in and out from an iOS and an Android device. One of the real nice features of Tracknicity is it gives you the ability to do custom requests for your warehouse personnel. So the ability to request a part, a piece, something that you need staged, or maybe you need Cat 6 ends on, stocked on the van that's not an inventory item. There's the ability to generate custom requests through there. There's also the ability to do user configurable notifications, and I'll go through that in a minute here. So where you can basically say, if you're waiting for a particular part to arrive that you've purchased for a job, instead of relying on the warehouse person to notify you when that comes in, you can click a simple button in Tracknicity, and as soon as that part is received into QuickBooks, you'll get an alert on your iPhone or Android device saying, hey, this part has been received. Reporting in history by employee and by job, so you can see who took what part to where, what parts are on which job. And then we've recently added minimum stock levels in as well. So if you care about making sure that you've got 4 chief mounts in stock at any point in time, you can set your minimum stock level to 4 on that, and if you get low on that, it will generate an alert to let you know that, hey, you're running low on those parts. So effectively, many people here are likely familiar with T-sheets, and we were, as a company, using T-sheets. What we tried to do was do what T-sheets had done for time tracking, we tried to do for inventory management. Time tracking used to be very challenging, very difficult, spreadsheets, whatever the case was. And as a point of reference, this is a visual representation of what we tried to do. This is a clipboard that our AV company was using a year and a half ago on how we would check out parts and pieces. And we tried to take that and deliver it using an iPhone and now Android application as well. So moving along, what problems does Tracknicity solve? So the first thing is it eliminates the need for any sort of manual tracking of inventory. You've invested in D-Tools, you've invested in QuickBooks, but to track inventory, many companies are still doing this. So getting rid of this and getting rid of the need for emails, post-it notes, directly syncing everything into QuickBooks and not doing it in a manual fashion. A lot of people say, well, I can just go enter it into QuickBooks, and yep, you absolutely can. But if your technician can scan it from an iPhone and have it automatically entered into QuickBooks, you've saved time and reduced the ability to commit errors. Tracknicity tells everyone what product is in stock and also notifies people when product arrives. So instead of the technician calling the warehouse person and saying, hey, do we have this in stock? And the warehouse person goes back and checks, and next thing you know, 3 people have touched it and they've been on hold for 5 minutes. They can quickly pull up their phone, check the inventory, check that inventory out to a specific job, have that hit QuickBooks, really saves time, energy around that. Gives every employee a free barcode scanner, as I mentioned. So again, any iOS, Android device that has a camera can be transformed automatically into a barcode scanner. The biggest benefit to Tracknicity from a value standpoint to me is that it makes sure you get paid for all the parts you used on a job at the end of the job. So I'll walk through a best practice in a minute here, but when you're done with a job, you want to look and say, did we make sure we billed for all the parts and pieces? Invariably, what would happen is a client adds an Apple TV to a job, or they add a 10-meter HDMI cable for whatever reason. And previously, you'd be reliant on your technician to say, hey, I'm checking this out, I'm taking this to the job, make sure you enter it into QuickBooks so we bill for it. Now with Tracknicity, that happens automatically. And when you go run the project reconciliation report at the end, all of that information shows up there automatically. So when you go and produce your final change order or your final invoice, putting the information back into D-Tools, you have that information in QuickBooks that's automatically there. One of the other big problems Tracknicity solves, as I mentioned, the ability to scan and track serial numbers and MAC addresses at customer locations. We found this to be very big in the education space. We've talked to a number of folks that are using D-Tools that have actually looked to just use Tracknicity to track this information because it's very seamless, very lightweight, very inexpensive to be able to do so. The last problem that Tracknicity solves, it solves a problem that most pieces of software don't solve. It's easy to deploy and doesn't break the bank. Tracknicity is very inexpensive. It's designed for small businesses, small enterprises, so it's not a multi-thousands of dollars solution for inventory management. There's no custom hardware required. It's a web-based application. So, think a few dollars per user per month with respect to that. And I will be going through some of that here in just a minute. I'll go through the pricing in just a second. As Tim mentioned, if you guys have any questions as we're going through this, please feel free to type those in the question area, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go. So for those of you who were on the last webinar, I wanted to just cover real quickly what's new from the last version. So we had a lot of great feedback from the first one. A lot of people said, hey, let me know when you've got this. So Android support was something we launched late last year, or middle of, I guess, September of last year. So the ability to use both an iOS as well as Android devices. We initially launched with iOS and brought Android on a little bit later. I mentioned the serial number, the MAC address, and the free field tracking. So the ability to put that information in seamlessly and then tie that back to your QuickBooks customer list so you have that information there. One of the other big things that we added at the beginning of this year was the ability to do B-stock assignments or open box. So if you previously all inventory was treated the same, we know that not all inventory is that way. So now if you've got something that's an open box, you can treat it as open box. You can assign a differential value to that. So maybe you default and say all open box, we treat it 90% value, but this one in particular is we want to treat it 50%. So you have the ability to go and do that and create that. So hey, this is new and this is open box. I mentioned the minimum stock level notifications earlier, so the ability to get notified when you run low on something. We really improved the audit functionality. So we found that a lot of people were using this to audit what was on vehicles, what was on vans, what was in the warehouse. So companies are now using Tracknicity to actually conduct audits and track their physical inventory on a monthly basis. One feature request we specifically got was the ability to hide product cost and sell from certain users. So certain accounts or people didn't want their technicians to be able to see what a product costs. So you have the ability to hide that. So if you want to only show that to admin users, you can. And then the big piece that we did, we added a lot of new process flows and a new video library to really help users get up and running. Tracknicity in and of itself isn't that complicated, but the business processes behind it have to be pretty well thought through and pretty mature in order for it to work. And what we were finding is that more people had more questions around, hey, how do I get things set up in QuickBooks? And how do I get things set up in D-Tools synced to QuickBooks? And so Jim spent a lot of time putting a video library together and the process flows to help people get on board with Tracknicity. So that's really the new functionality in Tracknicity since we launched it in the middle of last year. What I'm going to go to next is what we consider to be the best practice process between D-Tools, QuickBooks, and Tracknicity. So this is where sort of the rubber meets the road in terms of your systems flow for tracking things. So most of you on this webinar are going to be D-Tools users, and you're using D-Tools, as Tim mentioned, for what it does in a world-class fashion. Project design, quoting, drawings, purchase orders. Your parts list lives in D-Tools. So if you're designing a proposal with a chief mount, a particular chief mount, that part is in D-Tools because you've got the drawing for it, you've got the pricing for it, you've got your margin for it. That lives in D-Tools and is synced to QuickBooks. The other piece too is that in D-Tools you're doing your estimates, your designs, your proposals. So all that's being done there and then is pushed into QuickBooks. So if I move to the second piece there within QuickBooks, what QuickBooks is used for is to do all of the purchasing. So you may be generating your purchase orders out of D-Tools and pushing them into QuickBooks, or you may be doing purchasing straight out of QuickBooks. Doesn't really matter which way you do it, but QuickBooks is your purchasing engine. You also have your parts list, which is synced from D-Tools. So anything that lives in D-Tools lives in your parts list in QuickBooks, and that's sorted by manufacturer, sorted by make, model, etc. Your estimates that you have live in QuickBooks, so they come from D-Tools, get pushed into QuickBooks. So the actual estimate itself from a dollar standpoint and an equipment standpoint lives in QuickBooks. Then you do your invoicing out of QuickBooks as well. So where Tracknicity comes in is continuation of that parts list. So the parts list that we started in D-Tools that syncs to QuickBooks, also syncs to Tracknicity. So through QuickBooks, we're able to take anything that's in your D-Tools parts list and sync it into Tracknicity. So you're not managing a separate database, you're not managing a separate application. If it lives in D-Tools, it lives in Tracknicity. Tracknicity can be used for receiving parts to the warehouse. So if you order parts for stock, you can use Tracknicity to receive those parts into the warehouse. Where Tracknicity really starts to come into play is for checking out parts to jobs. So right now, QuickBooks doesn't give you the capability to say, I'm taking this product and taking it to this job, or I've staged this product for this job. Tracknicity gives you the ability, using the iOS and Android apps, to check out parts to the jobs, as well as handle all of the inventory management. So to see what parts you have on which vehicle, what parts have been taken to each job, what's in stock, etc. Tracknicity gives you serial number tracking. There are other applications. D-Tools gives you serial number tracking too. This kind of comes down to what function works best for your company. The reason we like it in Tracknicity is because since it's tied to QuickBooks, you now know, you have that history of QuickBooks customers, what serial number is where. So since that customer has to exist in QuickBooks, tying it to QuickBooks gives you the ability to quickly go in here, and I'll show you this in a minute, and pull up that serial number. Tracknicity makes returning parts from a job easy. So invariably, you go out to do an installation, and the client, changed from 8-inch speakers to 6-inch speakers. So you got to return the 8-inch speakers to stock. So instead of putting them on the warehouse person's desk with a note that says, hey, return these to job, the technician just scans them back in and puts them back on the shelf. Tracknicity gives you the ability to do customer level reporting, employee level reporting, as well as overall inventory valuation. So you actually get your inventory valuation out of Tracknicity. And Tracknicity can also help you track budget versus actuals on your job. So as you're going through the job, you can see the budget the budget of the estimate that's in QuickBooks and the actuals that are also in QuickBooks, because you pushed your estimate from D-Tools into QuickBooks, and you're tracking your actuals through whatever time tracking you're using, whether that's D-Tools mobile install, ClockShark, T-Sheets, manual process, whatever it is. As long as that information lives in QuickBooks, you can track budget versus actuals in Tracknicity. So Tracknicity is used for all those pieces as you're going through the job. And then what that allows you to do at the end of the job is go back into D-Tools, do your final drawings or your as-built drawings, get your final parts list and customer information. So you take those parts that you added through Tracknicity in the job and you go back into D-Tools and put them into D-Tools to make sure that you invoice for them and you know that you installed them at the customer site, which ultimately is going to help you produce your final change order or your final invoice and make sure that you get billed for all the parts that you used on that job. So that's kind of the flow of how D-Tools and QuickBooks and Tracknicity work together. We get a lot of questions, why doesn't Tracknicity integrate directly with D-Tools? And the reason is that Tracknicity is an inventory management application, and your inventory management application needs to tie directly to your financial software. D-Tools is a world-class design and engineering platform, but it is not a financial accounting piece. It is designed to do design, quoting, drawings, etc., but you don't manage parts, inventory in it. You're not managing finances and invoices in it. That's what QuickBooks is designed to do, and that's why Tracknicity integrates with QuickBooks that way. So what I'm going to do now is cut over to a quick demo, and I'm going to share over to here. You guys should be able to see the Tracknicity web dashboard here. So what I'm sharing here is basically the web dashboard from Tracknicity. So I'm just going to close out of a couple things here. Just minimize this here. So okay. So first thing I'm going to start with is reports. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. So if I go in here to projects, I can search for a customer report. So we created a D-Tools report. We also gave this D-Tools report a job number. This customer lives in QuickBooks, so any customer that lives in QuickBooks is going to show up in here. Now, if I could go in here and I could pull up this job right here. We also created a non-contract, which you could use for service. For example, however you track your job numbers or your jobs in QuickBooks is going to show up in here. So I go into this job here and I click Run Report. The first thing I see on the left here is my budget versus actuals in that job. So I had identified through my D-Tools proposal a budget of 46 hours. I can see that I've used 29 hours. I'm 17 hours under budget. I can click in here and I can go in and see my budget detail. So whatever phases that my budget is within D-Tools, in this case it was 3 phases of pre-wire, install, and programming, I can see where I am on those phases of that job. So I can see here, yep, I've used all my pre-wire, I've used 10 of my install, but I haven't done any programming yet. So real quick view of budget versus actuals in real time on any given job. Next, I can see the items that were purchased for that job. I can see, you'll see a couple things here. There's items on POs right here, and there's items from stock. So items from on purchase orders are for parts that were bought specifically for that job. So in this case, I can see that we ordered 3 Apple TV 4K 64 gig parts. That's a part that lives in QuickBooks. I can see that I've received 3 of these, but I can see that 0 have been delivered to the job site. So I know that, hey, these are staged and ready to go in the warehouse for this job. Same thing here for my 2 chief mounts. Same thing here for my Cisco switches, etc. You can see how these are highlighted in a darker color a little bit. What that's showing me is that these haven't been received yet. So my Ruckus R510 access points and my Ruckus zone director haven't been received yet. If I click on this button right here, I'm logged in as Jim Ford right here in Tracknicity, and you see that up here. Let's say tomorrow this arrives in the warehouse and our warehouse person receives this into QuickBooks. I'm going to get a notification on my iPhone saying that the Ruckus ZD112 for the D-Tools D2020 job has been received in the warehouse. So I get that information directly instead of having to wait for somebody to tell me, hey, this part arrived. So where that's really helpful is you get towards the end of a job and you're waiting for that last part or that last piece to show up. You can automatically set your notifications and the ability to receive those alerts. You'll also see here on this bottom piece, this Sony XBR Z9 TV, we ordered 2, we received 2, and we've delivered 2. So in this case, maybe I want to look and see where did that go. So I click right here, and I can see that on Wednesday, February 19th, this was checked out by Travis Leo. So I have the history to say, okay, yep, if I need to know where'd those TVs go or where'd they end up, I've got that information right here. So that was the items on the purchase order, and those populate automatically because of a purchase order that was done in QuickBooks or done in D-Tools and pushed into QuickBooks for that job. So let's say we go and added another part here in QuickBooks because we realized we needed to add another Sony TV. As soon as that purchase order is generated in QuickBooks for that job, in this case, that D2020 job, that piece would show up here automatically as quantity 1 ordered, 0 received, because we haven't received it yet, but it's going to sync automatically because it is a real-time feed between Tracknicity and QuickBooks. The bottom piece down here are items from stock. So these are items that when we said we put the job together, we said, oh, we've got one of these in stock. So you can see here that this has been staged for the job, but hasn't been delivered. Whereas the 2 Roku streaming sticks, 2 staged, 2 delivered, I click on it right here, and again, I can see which technician took it and what date that they took it on. So I've got all of that information right here. And I can filter this report for different customers. So if I want to go in and I want to look at a different job, I run the report and I can see the same information right here. So again, pulling real time into QuickBooks. If we added a new customer in QuickBooks and I ran this query right now, it's going to find that additional customer. So anything that lives in QuickBooks is going to show up in here. Inventory by location is the next report. So this basically shows you what inventory you have where. So again, I can quickly look at it right here. I can see the parts, and this is obviously sample data. I can click right here and it brings up the Apple TV 4K. Now I've got all my history here, so I can see my cost and price. I can see the UPC code. UPC codes are learned using the mobile application. So you basically go to the item, you say, learn this UPC code, scan it in, and you're good to go. I can see my minimum stock quantity. So if I want to set this minimum stock quantity to 4, I can just go in and adjust that. And then if it gets low, it'll say, hey, you're running low on Apple TVs. I can see how many B stock items I have on hand. Think open box, think something that's not new, but you don't want to lose visibility to it. I've got my history here, so I can see that on Thursday, December 19th, one of these was taken from this job to the warehouse. So this was a return on December 19th that came back. As I mentioned earlier, Tracknicity not only works for checking parts out, but for checking parts back in as well. I can see on this date that we took one from the warehouse to the Kris Kringle Workshop Updates program. So I've got all that visibility here. And then I can also see where my quantities live. So I've got 3 of these in van 1, I've got 1 in van 2, and I've got 4 in the warehouse. So I know where my inventory lies for that particular part. I can go in here and I can see just my B stock items. So if I want to know, hey, what do I have open box that I need to move or sell or whatever, I can see here. And you'll notice that every time I do that, this number right up here, in this case, 314.82, is changing. If I go back to all items, I've got $13,000 in inventory here. If I click on warehouse, I can see that I've got $7,200 of my inventory in my warehouse. I've got $2,300 on van 1, etc. So you can easily see where your dollars of inventory are tied up in here. Next report, I'll just X out of this and go into the history. So I'm going to look back for the last 6 months, and I'm just going to run a quick report. This shows me my history of things. So I can see here that on Monday, February 17th, Jim Ford took a Ring Doorbell Video Pro from the warehouse to this D-Tools 2020 job. So I can see here quantity 1, yep, that's going out. When you see red, that's a negative, meaning it came out of stock. If I scroll down here, I see a green on January 30th. Same user, Jim Ford, brought a Cisco switch from the job to the warehouse. So I've got my visibility there to see what came back. And I maybe have a purple. Here's a good example. This right here is not filled in. This is a custom part. So when I show you the web app or the iPhone app in a minute, you'll see where Maybe your technician needed something. In this case, they needed Cat 6 ends, which weren't inventoried. Well, he put a custom request in to say, hey, I need Cat 6 ends for this job. It's not in inventory, so it doesn't show up, but you can still use Tracknicity to track it and stage it for that technician. Just see if I have a purple one here. Here's a good example. This is an internal transfer. So in this case, it went from van 1 to the warehouse. This one went from the warehouse to van 6. So you can track internal transfers as well. I can run different report filters. So maybe I want to look at, only what Jim Ford has done in the last 6 months. So I can run that. Maybe I want to look at what we've done for a particular job, and I run that. So I can see it by job, I can see it by employee, I can see it by time frame, all sorts of different ways to see what the history of a part is. Audits, this is where I go in and where I can see the audits that I've conducted. So I can look in here. This is an audit that was conducted in the warehouse on Monday, February 3rd. So I can see what the original quantity of parts was. I can see what we actually found. So we went through, in this case, we audited these 5 items, and I then go in and make adjustments right here. So, and in this case, we had 1 less Apple TV than we thought, 1 less Chief mount, but 1 more LTM1U mount. So I can go in and run my audits in here, and then in this case, I can see that I had approved these already. That's what the check mark is here. So this allows you to do your physical inventory counts, your audits when you're auditing your vans, etc. I'm going to jump out of this for a minute and go back into serial item and item detail lookup. Oops. So this is where I can go and track the serial numbers that have been installed at a customer's home. So maybe I happen to know the serial number. Maybe I know the item, or maybe I know the customer. So let's start with the customer. Sorry, I shouldn't have had this up here. So I go in, I know the customer is D-Tools, so I go bring up that job. It brings up for me a list of all of the serialized items that are at that job. So in this case, I can see that this serial number right here that's associated with this item, in this case, it's a Control4 amplifier, is installed in this location. So this is a free field that can be added to, so you can say master bedroom, conference room 214, rec room, mechanical room, whatever the case is, it's a free form field. The MAC address, I just typed in a random MAC address here. And then there's also an additional field. So in this case, I typed in the IP address because the IP address is something that a lot of people want to be able to track. So I can look at this job, and if there were more serialized parts on here, I'd be able to see all of the serialized parts on here. Maybe I know that the customer has a C4 amp, and I search right here, it brings up that same information. So I know the item, and I can bring it up right here, and it shows me, oh, you've got one of these at D-Tools D2020. So again, this is synced directly with QuickBooks and the parts list that's in QuickBooks. If I know the serial number, I can also search for it right here as well, and it'll bring back that particular information. Most of the searching for serial number tracking is done by item or by customer. But having the ability to not only track which customer it's at, but also what location it's in, MAC address, and an additional field, free-form field, i.e. IP address, gives you great capabilities to track your equipment out in the field, process returns, process warranties, whatever the case might be. Approvals, this is a piece we added in at a couple of specific requests. So if I go in here, I can see that I just ran a query for the last week. When a part gets checked out, we have it go into an approvals queue. And that's just basically to make sure you got a second set of eyes on it, make sure that we're not missing something. So if I go back to this report filter and I show all of these, just go back a little further, approved, I can see that they're highlighted in green here. And that means that somebody said, yep, that's approved. I agree, that went to the right spot. If I go to unapproved, it's going to show me what hasn't been approved. I click here and approve, approve, approve. Maybe I need to reject this one. So it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to reject this, because it's going to take its inventory back to its previous state. So I can go and do those approvals. Just adds another set of data tracking and legitimacy to your inventory piece. If I run it all, now I can see what's approved, what hasn't been approved, etc. So I've got visibility into that here. Let's see, inventory we've kind of covered. Again, if I go in here, it's going to bring up that same type of information: inventory by location, cost, etc. Going here to company, this is where you do your general settings. So you put in your company name, how you handle the integration with QuickBooks. QuickBooks operates in both inventory mode and non-inventory mode. Tracknicity works with either one. So you set it up here, and we walk you through this during the onboarding session with Tracknicity. This is also where you set your global value for your B-stock items. So in this case, and there's a good example here, if you want to carry it at 80%, you would just set this to 80. We've got this one set at 90. You can override that. So if you want to track it at 90, but like I said, on a particular one, you're going to say, I want to assign 50% value to that, you can go and do that. This is where you manage your Tracknicity subscription, and this is where you put your logo that shows up on the app for all of your users. Inventory location and users, let me just X out of a couple boxes here so you're not seeing too much stuff up here. Inventory locations, this is where you go and manage your inventory locations. So let's say you added a new truck to the fleet, you go here, and you go and add truck 2, and all of a sudden you've got a new location signed up in there. Maybe you want to assign a particular user to that. Oh, sorry, that's done in users. So I can edit it here if I wanted to change the name of it, but good transition into users. This is where I have all of my users. So maybe I want to go and assign Jim to that newly created truck 2. I go in right here and I save that right there. So here's my users. Adding a user is as simple as doing that, giving them a username and password. There are 2 different fields here. Admin basically gives them admin rights, the ability to see costs, the ability to scan products, some additional admin capabilities, as well as receive request notifications. So this is where, if you want this is for whoever's going to be receiving requests of, I need this part, I need this staged, I need this custom part, etc. You want them to click right here so that they receive those notifications. Users total valuation. This is a quick report that comes out of Tracknicity that shows where your dollars in inventory lie. So I can see my trending of how our inventory valuation has done. I can also see where my high dollar parts are right here. So I can see that I've got 9 Intellex Balins, $275 each. I've got $24.75 in value tied up there. So just kind of shows the high dollar values associated with that. QuickBooks integration. This is where you go and set up the web connector for QuickBooks. So you download the web connector file here, you use this password, and again, we walk you through this during the onboarding process as well. That's pretty much it as far as the app. I'll go to the mobile app in just a minute. This how-to has the initial overview of things, how-to on the mobile app, the process flows for either inventory or non-inventory, how you purchase items. This is the tutorial behind doing everything. So this is the sort of go-to place for how to do things, the overview of the mobile app, how to check things out, how to manage projects, how to handle requests. So these process flows people have found very helpful in getting up to speed with Tracknicity, getting it integrated with QuickBooks, and getting it integrated with D-Tools. What I want to do for a minute is switch over to the mobile app. So hopefully you guys can see, this is just a simulated iPhone on a screen here. So again, that logo that we put in back in the dashboard shows up right here. The user's dashboard shows up like this. So first of all, it shows you your project. So any open project in QuickBooks is going to show up right here. You click on that. We go to that same D-Tools job, and it brings up that same budget versus actuals report that we looked at previously. Same data that we looked at in there. If you remember, we had assigned the user Jim Ford to truck 2. So we click on truck 2. It would bring up any inventory that's there. Obviously, there's no inventory in truck 2 because we just added that to the fleet. But if there were, it would bring up that inventory here so that he can look real quickly and say, okay, do I have that piece on my truck? 2-week history is going to show their history of what parts they've checked out in the last 2 weeks. So just a real quick snapshot of what they've used in the last 2 weeks. Submit request is where they would go and submit a request for a particular part, for a particular piece, or maybe it's a custom request. So let's say Jim needs, on truck 2, he needs Cat 6 ends. He goes to custom request, he types Cat 6 ends, oops, and adds that to there, click submit right here. And now somebody's going to receive a notification saying, hey, there's a request for Cat 6 ends to that van, or excuse me, to that truck in this location, or to this truck in this situation. You can see here that Jim's got a request here, so he can go in and say, yep, I want to see where the status of this request is. So, yep, that's all right. He can see that it hasn't been acknowledged yet, so the warehouse person hasn't acknowledged that they've received it. Now they have acknowledged that they've received it, and then when it gets staged, they would click yes, and now it's staged. So he's going to get a notification on his phone every time that a request is acknowledged or staged. So you're not calling back and forth and saying, hey, is this ready to go? That using the iOS and Android notification engine, you're getting those alerts straight onto your device. Serial number item detail. Well, let me come back to that. I'm going to go to transactions. So this is really the core of the Tracknicity mobile app. So this is where taking parts from the warehouse or from the staging area. And we segment those two out right here, where you'll see staging area and warehouse. Staging area is parts that are bought specifically for a job. So in this case, I go to the staging area, I go back to that D-Tools project we were looking at, and it brings up that same list of parts that have been received in the warehouse for that job. So maybe I'm going to take the Apple TVs, the Ring Video Doorbell, and I'm going to take 2 of the Ruckus access points. I go and select those, I hit checkout, and now it shows me here's what's still left to take from the pick list. So in that situation, those parts were what was ordered specifically for the job. Maybe I'm taking something from stock instead. So the client added something to that job. In that case, I select warehouse. I again go pull up the client. It's going to bring up my entire QuickBooks client list. I go to that part. I go here, and now I can either browse, scan, or search for an item. Browsing the item brings up my parts list from QuickBooks. So I go here to Control-4. I go to this AMP and do that, and it brings that up here. If I were doing this on a real phone, I would click scan, and it would bring up a barcode. Obviously not doing it because I'm doing it on a computer, but I could scan the barcode from the phone, or I can search for the item right here. So I can go in here and I can start with Cisco, and it'll bring me all my Cisco pieces, and I can say that's what I want to add. And now if I go and submit that, say transaction successful, if I went into QuickBooks right now and once I approved them, and I ran that report, those costs would show up, those items would show up on the QuickBooks report for that job. So I can make sure that I billed for those items that Jim took out of stock and took to that job. Serial number and item detail. So this is very similar to what we looked at on the web dashboard. If I want to go and select the item, I can again browse. So I remember we had that Control-4 piece. I pull it up. So it's this piece right here. I can attach the serial number. So if I'm installing, so let's let me use a better example. Let's say I'm out at the home and I'm putting a Roku streaming stick in, and I want to attach the serial number. So again, I could scan it if I had a phone here, or I can just free field type it. And I go in and I can free field type the serial number. I can select which customer it goes to. So I'm going to D-Tools, I'm going to that job. I can type in the MAC address. I can show that it's in the master bedroom, and the IP is 192.168.7.7. Oops, good typing there. So if I go and save that, then next and submit that, now that information lives in the database, so I can go and pull up that D-Tools customer on the web dashboard and see where that piece exists. So you can scan serial numbers at the warehouse, you can scan them at the job, lots of different, we set it up so that you can do it really anywhere, because a lot of times you don't know what serial number is going in what location until you're actually on site. Some of the other softwares that we had looked at required you to scan it when you brought it into the warehouse, but a lot of times you don't know where it's going at that point in time. So this gives you the ability to assign it literally as you're installing it by scanning it from your iPhone. Inventory brings up real quick view of inventory. Same thing we looked at on the web dashboard. In this case, I'll look at the Mac Mini. I can see my history here. I click view locations, and it's going to show me what locations that inventory lives in. Again, if I move them around, it's going to sync up automatically. This little bar right here is where I can go in and do some administrative functions. So I can change my minimum stock quantity on here. So let's say I want to know when our stock quantity in the warehouse becomes 2, get an alert. So I can change that minimum stock quantity here. I can show, maybe I got one back. I've got 2 B stock quantity, and I want to carry those, instead of carrying them at 90%, I want to carry them at 75%. And so I would go and submit that. So this is also where I can learn the UPC code. So I would click on here, it would bring up the camera, I scan the UPC code, and that will associate the UPC code with that item forever, basically. So that's the inventory piece. Admin, this is where you can go in and do those audits. Same thing that we looked at previously. You can also use it to learn UPC code, as well as receive your stock parts into the warehouse or into a specific vehicle. You can also look at that same history and reconciliation piece that we looked at previously there. So being respectful of time, that's a real quick view of Tracknicity and the web dashboard and the like. I'm going to change this back here to the slides real quick. As I mentioned earlier, Tracknicity is very easy to deploy and very cost effective. So here's the pricing structure right here. It's designed to be, depending upon the size of the company, a few dollars per user per month. Most of our clients fall into either the standard or premier. So, for a company of 15 employees, Tracknicity works out to about $100 a month. If you're a little bit larger company, maybe you've got 15 field techs, warehouse, it's a couple $100s a month. And there's no add-ons, no additional costs, certain number of items, certain number of projects, certain size. It gives you unlimited access to everything that Tracknicity offers. So it's designed to be very cost effective, very easy to use, very easy to get on board with. So how do you work with Tracknicity? You can certainly go to the website, www.tracknicity.com. There's also a link here to our partnership page with D-Tools. There's a phone number on there that you can call and just mention that you're a D-Tools user. In order to really take advantage of Tracknicity, we recommend that D-Tools users use the QuickBooks integration feature. You don't 100% have to, but it really makes things a lot easier in terms of parts and purchase orders connecting between the two. So if you want to try Tracknicity, you can go to the website and download the free software. And when you do, we will contact you to schedule a free onboarding session to get you up and running with Tracknicity. So Tracknicity is, you download it, we get an alert, we'll reach out to you to say, hey, let us help you get up and running. You get a 30-day free trial. As I mentioned, there's a full video library to help get you up and running, as well as the process walkthroughs to get you set up and get you off and running. Many people have already tried Tracknicity and said, geez, I want to try it again once you've got some of the new features. Give us a shout, and we're happy to extend your trial so you can try out some of the new features, particularly the serial number tracking, the minimum stock quantities, etc. So really, that's the end of the webinar here. My contact information, travis@tracknicity.com. Please feel free to send me an email, reach out to us if you have any questions. I encourage you to go to the website, take a look at the software, take a look at the videos. More than happy to share any information that we can with you. If you're using D-Tools and you're using QuickBooks, Tracknicity is the product you want to be using for inventory management. It was designed for that specific use case. The response we've gotten from clients has been tremendous. We've got some testimonials on our website about how it's saving them time, dollars, etc.